Wednesday, July 12th, 2023, a meeting of the Brentwood Planning and Zoning Commission. If you would please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, everyone. Good to see you. Mr. Moran, if you would mind, please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt Foreman. Jeff Hunt.
Here.
Carl Carlin.
Here.
Jeff Moore.
Here.
Paul Moran here. Hart Nelson.
Here.
Brian Nolan.
Here.
John Nurnberger.
Here.
And we have regrets from the rest of the crew.
Great.
We do have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. Next item of business is approval of the agenda for this evening. The agenda has been disseminated. Any changes need to be made? Seeing none, any objection to approval of the agenda by acclamation? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. Next item of business is approval of the minutes. The minutes for our May 10th, 2023 meeting have been distributed. Any changes or alterations needed to the minutes? Seeing none, any objections to approval of the minutes by acclamation? The minutes are approved. Next item is citizen comments. I believe we do not have any citizens wishing to address us at this point. Seeing only Mr. Cannon. Next up, we have our new business. Our first is P&Z 23006. This is Section 400, Division 7, Stormwater Management, Grading, and Erosion Control. I believe we have a presentation this evening on that topic.
Yes, so we had our pre-presentation meeting before this session. This is just a continuation from that for Tony. The official presentation and materials are in your packet for you. If there's anything else you would like Tony to address or just quickly, briefly run through it again, he'd be happy to do so. I
think that, yes, we don't want to run through the whole presentation again, but since we did have a number of commission members who weren't here, I think perhaps just a bit of the highlights, I think that that may be helpful in the interest of time unless there's any objections. But I do think it was good information, and I know that some of the questions, keep me honest, those who were here and helped summarize, we were very interested in understanding the impacts that this would have on both costs to folks looking to do projects, obviously costs for the city. Really, it's those significant changes from existing ordinances that if we could just get a brief highlight, I think that would be useful. Anything else folks want to focus on? And these have been, just so folks are aware, they have been distributed as mentioned, and they are in your packets, both the presentation and the supporting documents.
So do you want me to go through, is there a specific one to start at? Or do you want me to go through the highlights of the whole thing?
Let's just do highlights quickly, but I guess we can just throw up a slide, and I think that's where, if for folks who weren't here, if there are any questions on that slide, let's maybe give a time target to help you with the pace, just so we can be maybe 10 minutes. And I know we were taking 40 with the number of questions that we had, but let's do that.
Okay. So just as a background, all of these ordinance recommendations came out of the Stormwater Master Plan that Gonzalez completed about a year ago, okay? During our stormwater master planning, we went out and looked at a number of different issues, and again, these are things that we've noticed that maybe we can prevent with ordinance revisions. The first ordinance revision would be, again, generically here, to change the ordinance for an excavation permit. The trigger right now is 43,560 square feet or an acre. We're recommending something less than that, maybe 10,000 square feet is what the new ordinance language says. Okay, on to the next one.
Yeah, and just to, obviously you'll see the pattern here, right? You'll see the pros, cons, and cost consideration. So if any of those catch your attention and you wish to ask any questions, please do so, or please let me know.
The next section, there's actually multiple sections within the ordinance that refers to a datum. A datum is a survey benchmark. Right now, the ordinances are vague as to what benchmark to use. The suggestion here, or recommendation, would be to use the state plane coordinate system, NAD 88, that everybody should be using, and if they're not, they the ordinance would require them to. And again, there's no cost involved because the available datums are free, and so nothing special here. Just
Looking for
trying to-
standardization, so no.
The next one here is in regards to stormwater design standards. Right now, the ordinance says that a secondary routing must be evaluated or could be evaluated based on engineering judgment for storm events of 25 or 50 years. Right now, MSD requires that secondary routing be evaluated for all projects up to 100-year. Seems appropriate to bring the city of Brentwood up to those standards of MSD and of industry standards. Secondary routing would be an overland flow route. And this overland flow route would need to be investigated anytime stormwater infrastructure was built, a storm pipe or a storm inlet that may convey the water rather than the existing overland routing. So if you're going to close in a ditch, you may need to evaluate what happens if that pipe becomes clogged, et cetera.
Mr. Shank, if you can hold on a second there, just, this is one that we had a considerable amount of discussion over. I know we have some architects now in the room, but this is one that we talked about quite a bit with some of the examples, so just wanted to share.
You want to let him finish and come back with questions?
I think that would be, this just last bit of the slide, and then let's hold there, because I think there will be questions on this one.
Yep. So for the city costs, there's really is none because the review of that secondary routing would be encapsulated already with the reviews for the permit in general. User costs, there would be additional user costs here, right? So to evaluate these secondary routing, it's going to take additional engineering. Most engineers have the ability to add this secondary routing type of analysis into their designs. The storm modeling software allows that, and it takes a little bit of time to get set up. So I'm estimating here as a civil engineer that does this type of work to be about $1,000 or $1,500 to do another routing evaluation. Implementation costs, I would really estimate this to be nothing, because what we're talking about is, again, providing an overland flow routes, a low point, a swale for the water to go maybe between the houses whenever that pipe became clogged, rather than building a berm. What's the cost differential between building a berm or building a swale, right? Pretty minor, it's just grading activities. The example that I provided during the presentation was a situation we found on Pine Avenue here in Brentwood, where we've got stormwater coming down the street from both directions. It ends up at an inlet at the low point of the road. But what happens when this inlet is clogged? The water needs somewhere to go. Between these two houses is where the storm pipe goes. Between these two houses, there's a secondary inlet behind the houses in the backyards. But the yards are higher than the driveway, and the driveway is the secondary route, and the water goes down the driveway into the garage at the end of the driveway, rather than through that overland flow route or a swale potentially between homes. So that's, yeah.
Mr. Foreman, I think you had a question.
The first question I had was, should we let him finish the entire presentation?
No, I think sorry, my apologies. We're breaking this down by ordinance. So yeah, if you have questions on particular, there's a few, so.
So when you started the commentary, the trigger for this would be stormwater infrastructure.
Correct.
So understandably, as you're saying, if MSD is moving stuff, this could be triggered. But if the homeowner is doing like if one of those two homes on Pine was being torn down.
Correct.
However, and Whitney helped me with this, if a new home is being built, we're already requiring stormwater.
So what we're requiring is for them to have a stormwater detention. So for this particular situation, maybe there was this isn't a great example.
I'm driving to the trigger for the owner of the residence, which could be a developer, to engage this. But what your example gives, and I guess this is where my clarification comes, you're saying it's $1,000 to $1,500 engineering cost. However, if someone's doing a tear down in a new build, we already have a requirement for stormwater analysis, correct?
Correct, but it has nothing to do with this overland flow route whatsoever
But if we're not starting from scratch, we'd be adding the overland flow to this current requirement for grading and stormwater, correct?
They're a little bit separate. In most situations, when we have a tear down and rebuild of a house, you have to provide stormwater detention, okay? Stormwater infrastructure that I'm,
And just to jump in real quick, that's only if you're adding an additional 200 square feet over the prior home that was removed. If you're doing, some people are doing the same square footage as the prior home, so no additional stormwater is always needed.
so the situation is whenever a stormwater infrastructure, as in a pipe is being replaced, like the pipe between these two houses, or a new inlet would be, so if MSD likely maintains the pipe here, right? They maintain the stormwater infrastructure in the city of Brentwood. However, we've had a situation where a homeowner didn't like the swale in between their house. It was an unkept swale that they were going to enclose with a pipe during a tear down and a rebuild. So we're going to put in a pipe. I said, mister, you're going to block the stormwater and it's going to go into your neighbor's walkout basement. He says, the pipe is sized for a 10-year design storm as is required. And I said, well, we have to at least abide by the current regulation to evaluate the overland flow route between a 25 and a 50-year event. And I hopefully provided some reprieve to the neighbor in that situation. But in events where that pipe is clogged or there's a bigger than a 50-year event, what happens to that stormwater now? It goes off into the neighbor's property because that's the low area, because they've changed where the low area is by enclosing a swale in between their houses with a pipe.
I'm breaking this into two different things. Number one, if that line goes between those two houses, there should be an easement for MSD. So somebody coming to fill in a swale that is actually in an MSD easement should throw all sorts of other red flags. When that's up there with no MSD infrastructure, et cetera, they're just building a home and they're regrading.
That would not trigger this situation.
That's actually the heart of the question. So that with no MSD work happening, only downspouts coming off the house, that would be covered by the current city ordinance for the stormwater analysis for a new home.
That's correct.
And I think I overheard as I came in, and I apologize for being late in the previous meeting, was there a trigger at 1 cubic yard?
Yeah, so this was, that was in regards to the land disturbance.
A different section.
Different section, yeah. So this is the land disturbance of 10,000 square feet. However, if you're disturbing land that's over 10,000 square feet, but you're not moving a cubic yard of dirt, you still don't have to do this other permit.
Got it, okay. So with the qualifier from the visual example that's currently on the screen, it's a little deceptive because that actually wouldn't trigger the additional $1,000 to $1,500 review.
Correct. Correct.
But it shows the swales, yeah. Got it. Other questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Keep going.
Next one is an ordinance that requires maintenance agreements. Right now, maintenance is required on erosion control and stormwater detention facilities, but leaves out the new stormwater best management practices that are being installed with the stormwater infill development permits. Those also need maintenance. The operation of them is crucial through maintenance. If maintenance is not performed on the residential detention, like these dry wells, they are ineffective and they can actually cause more harm than what we're trying to avoid by installing them. So the suggestion here is that we have a maintenance agreement that is enforceable when issues arise.
Carlin?
Is maintenance of these facilities possible by the homeowner themselves, or does it require a professional to do it?
Yes, it is. The tops of these come out, and you could dig them out with a shovel.
So what would a maintenance agreement look like in the case where the homeowner was doing it themselves?
If the homeowner is doing their own maintenance, if they're getting the sediment out, which allows for the stormwater to actually be detained in there, then there should not be an issue where we need to pull out the maintenance agreement and said, you need to do this, right? So the point of the maintenance agreement would be to, if issues arise, give the city some teeth to force them to maintain. If they're already doing the maintenance,
But the agreement is between the homeowner and the city,
correct,
not a private entity that comes to maintain the.
correct.
The questions?
Question for staff. Actually have any of these for residential?
A lot of the new homes, how many have you said you think you've done this year? A lot of the new homes do have stormwater detention on site, yeah.
I've done 50 in the last 3 years and 15 in the last 3 weeks.
In Brentwood?
Yes, sir.
Chairman of the Architectural Review Board, I'm surprised because I haven't noticed them on plans anywhere, but okay.
Well, yeah,
They're in
you
the
don't
civil
review
plans and they're
those, so they
underground.
you review the architectural design, and so they're not always shown at that level, but they are once they receive building permits.
Got it.
Okay.
Mr. Nuremberger?
So the maintenance agreement would run concurrent with the property.
It would be required to be recorded at the St. Louis County of Deeds, so it would continue with the property.
Yeah, so about 3 to 5 years before you would have to do any maintenance at all, but you'd have to call in a landscaper, or depending on how big of a system you have, maybe you have to call in somebody with a piece of equipment. And so, you know, it's a day's work, $500, $2,000, depending on the situation. 3 to 5 years is the estimated maintenance. Otherwise the system doesn't work. Yes, sir.
Recorded with a recorder of deeds.
Mr.
So
Conley.
what would, if there's an agreement, it implies that the city then has action to take if the agreement isn't kept.
Correct.
So how do we know that the agreement hasn't been kept? Does the city have the right to go on the property and look, or is it only when there's a flood problem that we think there's a to look?
So the way I envision it is that you're probably not going to go check all of these all the time. You're going to wait until you get a complaint, and we've had complaints that we've had to investigate during our stormwater master plan, and it was a direct cause of one of these failures, and it was, you know, again, having a discharge that was concentrated coming straight out of the pipe rather than being dispersed across the yard and causing an issue. And so I would envision that you're going to wait for an issue to arise and then pull out the paper to enforce it.
And so it's a retroactive enforcement.
It's teeth where there is no teeth right now.
Right. And so then what is the enforcement mechanism at that point? Is there a fine? Like what happens if they?
Yeah, essentially, I believe the maintenance agreement says that the city can hire somebody to come take care of it and then back charge the owner. Yeah, it'd be the same as if somebody didn't mow their grass, right?
Other questions? Ms. Moran?
Are these stormwater detention facilities, are they mosquito factories?
I'm sorry?
Are they mosquito factories? Are they going to sit there with water, right, that's still and just, you know, be a health hazard in that respect?
So most of the ones that are being installed are installed underground. Some of them are what's referred to as a rain garden, where some of the water can sit on top of the ground for a period of time. The purpose is that the stormwater actually infiltrates into the ground before the mosquitoes have a chance to breed. And this is what happens whenever you don't maintain a facility. you have these mosquito breeding grounds, because this is a stormwater best management practice. These are some permeable pavers. They need to be pressure washed out to allow the water to go into the ground and not sit on top of those pavers and cause the issue that you're talking about. So not having this would be more of the mosquito breeder than the other way.
On an unrelated topic, do you live around here?
I do, yes.
Like, there are like frozen ice sheets extending like I mean, I walk the dog in the morning, people are letting water out across the sidewalk, and,
We're going to talk about sump pumps here in a minute.
okay, we'll move on then. Thank you, Mr.
We
Chairman.
talked about ice sheets not too long ago, but no.
That was actually one of the biggest complaints during our stormwater management project. We investigated a lot of ice sheets, actually.
I am
Okay, thank
in
you very
Mr.
much.
Moran's court on that one as well. All right.
So here we don't actually have a recommendation, just something for you to consider. It was a topic that got brought up during the discussion of the ordinances. Right now, we have a definition of what requires a stormwater infill development, permits, and detention. And right now, that happens anytime you have a net impervious of 200 square feet or greater being developed on your property. For your consideration here, a single-car garage is 14 by 24, say, which is well over the 200 square feet. I had given an example here where we had a 10 by 19 addition to a home, and that's under 200 square feet, but they also added a little bit of a porch, and so they went over the 200 by a few square feet, and were required to get a stormwater permit, and the permit costs $500. The engineering somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000. The implementation of a stormwater best management practice, $3,000 to $6,000. So you're talking for 10 by 19 addition, nearly $10,000 for this particular homeowner to comply with the city's permits. We've been talking about all of the other costs that are then that go along with these types of projects, and maybe the city's a little bit restrictive on the 200 square feet. Something to think about.
And so, Mr. Shank, just to make sure I recap what I understood before, is there's not a recommendation at this point, but just flagging that this 200 square foot limit may be low, and we need to raise that.
So just as a fellow member of the Architectural Review Board, although it doesn't fall under our purview, the issue of stormwater comes up almost every meeting. And so, the fact that we have this ordinance passed has been quite a benefit, I think, to the city's residents and certainly to the process of approving the houses. So I think I stand in favor of maintaining regulations that we have in place. I don't know how you.
I would agree that they've been beneficial. This does, in the last 17 years, it comes up almost at every meeting. The 200 square foot metric might be worth evaluating. That does feel a little bit restrictive. And I'm looking at this going, if this were my house, I would do the addition, and 5 years later, I would do the porch.
Saying a little while ago. Yes.
So there's kind of a question of benchmarking implicit within the square footage limitation as well.
And just in the last discussion, we talked about providing some teeth to so I'm loath to remove some of the teeth that we already have when we have an enforcement problem already, so.
All right, next, the next section regards the permit procedure. Right now, the city has a very good procedure in place through the MyGov system. Things come in via email, processed via email, et cetera. The ordinance doesn't follow the current process. The suggestion here, the recommendation, is to change the ordinance to match the process that's actually being implemented. All good?
Moving on.
Next, we have a section regarding the fees, deposits, and the dollar amounts for violations. Right now, the city is left holding the bag whenever you have someone who is submitting for an infill development permit and requires multiple reviews. Right now, the fee covers 2 reviews. We've had some developers submit plans 3 and 4 times and not be able to read the checklist of things that they need to provide, and then I have to review those again, and then the city gets charged. And so what this would do would be to pass those charges along to the repeat offenders. We would also have at the discretion of the planning director to waive said fees. And then also, if we have a violation where someone should have gotten a permit and did not, that would be a violation. Right now, it says if there's a violation, you're going to charge $100. Pay the $100 instead of the $10,000 to implement the thing and move on, right? So here we're going to charge what it costs to make corrective measures, right? So that's some of the information that's on the screen there. And then also the deposit. The deposit right now says equal to the cost of construction, which is kind of a wild number that anybody can make up. That's not really what's being done anyway. We're charging 110% of the net impervious, and that's the deposit. So make the ordinance match the procedure, again, for the deposit.
Questions?
Currently, anytime a building permit is submitted, we review it, and if we find there's more than 200 square feet of coverage, we notify the applicant that they have to submit for the stormwater infill development permit, and the checklist and best management practices are on the city's website. So those are provided as well. Most of the applicants who come before the ARB are told in advance that they will require a stormwater in addition to, yeah. Correct. Yeah, the SWID permit process is already on the video graphic that they provided is on the city's website. And that's been up there for approximately a year when you did the last presentation.
Yeah, it was probably a couple of years now.
Couple of years, yeah. Like, so.
What are our neighbours doing, like Webster, Kirkwood, Clayton, in this regard? What have they already done, not what they're discussing?
I think in general, violations are the cost of the violation, right? The providing some latitude through your planning director, I think is important, but the fees of $500 and $1,000 are in line. But people shouldn't make mistakes 3 and 4 times without being punished or without punishing the city, because the city is paying for it. I can't answer whether or not they charge for the multiple reviews. I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Next.
Yep.
Next is sump pumps and downspouts. So we were talking earlier about the icy patches. This happens all over the city of Brentwood. Right now, the ordinance requires a discharge to be 10 feet from the property line, but allows it to be 4 feet from the property line, and treats sump pumps and downspouts equally. The recommendation here would be to require all the discharges to be 10 feet from the property line, unless the chief building official gives a variance because of a specific situation. Or that some pumps in all situations should be 10 feet from the property line if they're not directed towards a best management practice. Sump pumps, like this situation in the picture, discharging considerable amount of water right onto a driveway, which led right down to the road, creating an icy spot. This should be a discharge behind the, into the grass area and allow it to soak in rather than run right onto the pavement there. So again, some of the pros here, we allow that reinfiltration into pervious surfaces. Some of the cons may be that, there's a little bit of cost about rerouting some of these sump pumps or downspouts to the back of the front yards where we have the available space of this 10 feet. That was it.
Any other questions for Mr. Shank? Appreciate you singing for your supper twice and going through that again, but I think that was important. And just to make sure, I believe, City, the action we're looking for tonight is a recommendation to the board, or is that, am I understanding that correctly?
Well, at this point, I think we could probably take some time about whether we want to increase it from 200 to 500. Maybe review some of the information. I did note, I talked with Tony, one of the ordinance in here that I had placed in here is an older version, so I could update the newer version. So it might be best to continue this to the next meeting.
Consider this lodged, and then we will consider it at a future date. So table it for action for now. Do we need a motion to table it then?
I wouldn't table it. We can just continue it to the next meeting,
Motion for continuance,
August 9th. Yeah.
Okay. Do I have a motion to continue this discussion for our August 9th meeting?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Carlin. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hunt. All in favor? We'll do a voice vote on this. Signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. We'll continue it over to our August meeting. Thank you. Next up, we have new business. This is P&Z 23010. This is an amendment to the conditional use permit for the renovation of the building and additional seating to the Maize and Wheat Colombian Cafe Restaurant at 1910 South Brentwood Boulevard. Is the applicant here this evening? Please, if you can come forward to the podium, just state your name and address for the record, please, and tell us a little bit about your project.
Claudia Niswanger, 1912 South Brentwood Boulevard.
Ma'am? Can you speak?
You could pull it down. There you go. Make it easier.
Yeah.
Advance.
Yep. Hi, everybody. Claudia Niswanger, 1912 South Brentwood Boulevard. Today, with me, my husband, and my architect. We were planning to do some renovations. Some renovations to the front. I just want to make the front to look nice, beautiful, like a Colombian hacienda. And we want to add some tables outside. I'm new in the area. I'm new with the business. So I apologize for all the confusion. So with the renovation, I was planning to move my cashiers and put a table with six chairs, but then just decided, okay, we are not going to do that. We are going to have the 6 booths and the 2 tables inside. I would like to keep at least 5 chairs for the bar area. And I would like to know if it maybe is possible to put 4 tables outside, just to make it. People like to sit outside, but with 2 chairs. So I would like to reapply, so to say.
Okay. For the conditional use permit. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah, with the new structure.
Thank you. Normally what we'll do is we'll take our staff report, okay, and then we can ask questions, and we may have some questions for you as well from the commission, all right? Staff report, please, Ms. Kelly.
Do a PowerPoint for tonight, so I'll just go off the. So the applicant's is located on South Brentwood Boulevard. The property is addressed as 1910. The mailing address for this tenant is 1912 South Brentwood Boulevard. The building was originally developed in 1964 and is 3,350 square feet. In 2002, it was originally an Applebee's market, and in 2002, they sought a conditional use permit for sit-down dining establishment, where they would only have 11 tables and 32 seats. At the time, and pretty similar to current regulations, restaurants and cocktails were required to be on over half acre. The current site is 0.35 acres, so they're non-conforming. There was note in the prior staff report that there was additional land, but that was to the south, but that was taken for the Strassner extension. So they are pre-existing non-conforming. At the time of this staff report as well, it doesn't appear that it ever actually met the parking requirement. So they are non-conforming as part of the parking. It was divided up somehow between the carry-out portion of only allowing for 9, when carry-out is a minimum of 20 spaces plus 10 for every square foot of the entire building. And sit-down dining is 18 spaces per every 1,000 square foot of building, including in the outdoor dining. In the later meeting, or in the next item on the agenda, we are looking at revising our parking specifically for restaurants. However, this site is non-conforming because it never originally had enough parking on site. Therefore, we're recommending that you review the design to ensure that it meets with the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan. It is providing an update to the columns in front of the building, and whether or not we want to have them see if it's possible to extend the parapet to screen the existing rooftop mechanical equipment. That is a discussion for you. However, due to the non-conforming status of the parking, we are recommending that they limit it to the 32 seats and have no outdoor dining at this time. However, as Lee Cannon with CBB will discuss later, there is the possibility that we could eliminate the outdoor dining requirement to be included as part of that, because it is seasonal, and people, if you're filling up the restaurant interior, you don't generally staff the exterior as well. So, but I'll let Lee discuss that further.
That's something that we wish to discuss, because I know I believe CBB did a review of this case as well, or do we want to hold that over for the next agenda item? Or both?
Yeah, why don't you do both?
All right.
Good evening, Chairman and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. For the record, my name is Lee Cannon. I am a principal and traffic engineer with CBB, with offices at 12400 Olive Boulevard in Creve Coeur. I am here as a third-party consultant working directly for the city in this matter, and therefore Whitney asked that I review the parking issues specifically related to this proposal. I've been doing work in the area for 25 or 30 years, and I am familiar with the building as it used to be Applegate's Market, and then it became Applegate's Market with some sit-down dining, and now transitioned to maize and wheat a few years ago, and now they're asking for the expansion. So the difficulty from a code approval perspective is the fact that 13 years ago they didn't meet the requirements for parking, and now they're asking to add. So when you add on to something that didn't meet before, it's not going to meet. So our parking study basically goes through the calculations of the current zoning, which the current building doesn't meet. It also looks at the other project that CBB is currently working on for the city, which is a comprehensive review of the parking code and some specific recommendations related to certain land uses, restaurants being one of those uses. But even at the reduced number or rate of parking that CBB is going to recommend to the city, not yet accepted or approved or even vetted at this point, but it still would not meet. The current requirement for the facility that identifies as more of a carry-out or a drive-through with also internal seating for restaurants over 1,500 square feet, they have to have 20 spaces plus 10 per 1,000 gross square foot. And our recommendation is actually wiping out that kind of two-part and going to a 14 per 1,000. So they would still need, 50 some odd spaces, right? And they have 21 marked today. So there's 3 takeaways from the work that we did beyond the fact that the current code calculation and the recommended not yet adopted calculation don't meet. And that is, number one, I'm not a restaurateur. I've never owned a restaurant, but I have done traffic studies for countless restaurants in Brentwood and other places, and I've always been heard the restaurant owner saying, you know, when we have the patio open, we never have the dining room full. We don't have the kitchen. We don't have the staff to be able to do that. And so it's an amenity to the restaurant. I tend to believe the folks that run businesses that are successful, that they know what they're doing. So that's more of an aside to the conversation, but I would generally support the idea that to a certain extent, a small patio area is probably not additive in the parking needs or traffic generation for a restaurant. Okay, that's number one. Number two, this is a business that's been around for a long time here in town. When we were asked to do this several weeks ago, we didn't dive into the maize and wheat application right away. But one of the thoughts is it creating problems today? I don't know the answer to that because to this point we haven't done a parking study. I don't know if they use all of the 21 spaces or if they have people parked all over the place and their neighbors or not. Or maybe they don't use what they have. If the city wanted more information, we could go and do a parking count and observe operations and see what's going on. We would probably want to talk to the owner and have them provide us some information related to when they're busy, because you know it's July. It's school goes back in about 6 weeks. A lot of people are on vacation. Patterns are a little different this time of year generally, so might want to wait if we were to do that. But again, looking at that issue, is parking a problem today, and are they creating headaches for their neighbors? As far as I know, and I asked Whitney just offhand, do you get a lot of complaints from the neighbors? And her answer was not really. So,
Not really, but we do have in the application, in
We have
the
some public
file too, the property owner for the mattress firm has indicated he allows them to use some of their parking, but they tend to park in handicapped spaces, so he does have a concern about the increase of tables that could impact the parking. A resident raised a concern that there was an issue with parking with a prior tenant when it was a Dobbs or something.
Dobbs there?
So,
Like
and
back
he just
before
would
it
have a
was
concern.
Applegate's, before it was the barbecue place, before.
Very long
Yeah, and
memory.
he would just have a concern. So, but other than that, I haven't heard anything lately, outside of those two.
And there's no cross-use agreement between the two tenants existing right now. They're using their spaces, but it's not an official agreement.
That is my understanding. That could be a condition, that if they're meeting their parking needs by borrowing their neighbor's space, that the city could ask for some sort of documentation, because you never know. The mattress store could change ownership, and then maybe they have a different opinion, or it could redevelop into something else, or be consolidated and redeveloped into something else. So having a documentation would be helpful as well. The last thing that I did want to mention, and again, I think that the primary increase in seating for the restaurant is the patio space. The city could consider an approval that was conditional that would allow the building inspector, the zoning administrator, some entity here, the leeway, the authority to restrict the simultaneous use of indoor and outdoor seats if it became a problem in the future. So that, yes, you can have a patio with seats, but if you're creating a problem for your neighbors, then you can't have more than a total of X number of seats inside plus outside at any given time. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have on that item.
I think we'll have some questions. I'm going to make just a couple of my own, and then I'll open it up, obviously, for the panel here. So I just want to mention there were two public comments. One, I think that Ms. Kelly has covered. The other one, again, was from the mattress firm store, noting that they generally don't have issues. I think they had 2 concerns that were raised. It's in your materials as well. One of people cutting through at high speed, the other of parking in the ADA spot, which is a general violation, and that's something that we need to make sure. I do not believe the Mattress Firm has a whole lot of spots themselves. I tried to do a count, I think it's like 7 or 8 at the most. So there isn't a significant amount of overflow. Mr. Ken, just a quick question though, and I'm trying to understand from the existing layout. I heard, I think the original was 11 tables and 32 seats. Is that what you currently have in the restaurant right now, is 11 tables and 32 seats? Okay. And then making sure, and then adding, I heard, I think 8 more seats outside. Is that what you're looking to add, or did I misunderstand that? Yeah, okay. So total 40. Yeah, just thinking about that 50 calculation, which I knew would be like a recommendation, right? I mean, that's, more parking than you actually have seats, plus 18 staff. I get that there's carry out there. That seems a significant amount. The question that I had, long-winded way of getting around to question. First, the 2002 analysis leaves something to be desired. So I get that it was approved and never should have been approved based on it. I'm very glad that we have greater analysis and expertise with us 21 years later. So thank you for that. The public parking, street parking, that was something that was raised, and I wanted to investigate that a little bit. So we have the 21 or 22 spots on the lot, potential of some overflow parking with a cross-use agreement, a sharing agreement. What do we have available? Because there's nothing on Strassner. And so what is it that is behind by the power substation there? Is that zoned for parking? I can't recall if that's zoned for parking and how many spots are there, if folks, if you know.
I'm not aware that it's zoned for parking.
And
So,
I think if you look at an aerial photograph, there are people that are parked on that street behind the restaurant. And, if it's likely the business owner and some of their employees to keep spaces open, in their lot. One thing, the Brentwood City Code really doesn't talk about, the use of on-street parking, as you're more of a suburban community in general. And, the code is indicated as, on site. However, where it's legal to park and there's spaces available and it doesn't impede into residential neighborhoods, that's a practical approach to the use of parking on the street.
Yeah, I was thinking, and where I was talking about and looking at the overhead now is Urban Drive. And just looking if there's spots there. It does look, at least from the overhead, that outside of the Y play space. Okay. And I think,
hold up Google.
yeah.
They're not really striped. I do see someone that is parked there.
Yeah.
But it is not really striped. And the code requirement is for off-street parking.
Understand.
So,
Just understanding also the direction that I think Mr. Cannon was talking about, and some of the things we've been looking at with design is is 50 spots for 32 seats reasonable? Are we going to have, we're not having 18 staff, we're not having 10 staff, how many takeout are you going to have? And that's assuming that every single person is arriving alone in their car, and that's just not reasonable. So I think that a mix of off-street and on-lot, that street parking and lot may be something that we go to, and we'll talk about that in a minute. All right, I've talked enough. Members of the commission, Mr. Carlin.
So one question I didn't hear addressed: does the proposed change the number of spaces? Is there any loss of parking space by the proposed change?
no.
Okay. And then has anybody, yourself or anyone else, looked at potential restriping of the lot as it exists, because it's sort of an inefficient shape for parking?
I think it's about striped the best you could. You might find one stall, but you're not going to make a significant increase. It's just an awkwardly shaped piece of property. And I believe it was mentioned here, it was, I think, one of my recommendations a long, long time ago to punch a road through from Brentwood to tie into that existing piece of Strassner. So they lost property. This property lost property at some point in the past.
And I guess just end of questions, but sort of a comment. I am generally supportive of the notion. I think it's a nice addition to the restaurant. I'm glad that the restaurant is successful in that location where things were not in the past, and it's a nice amenity. So, as an outdoor diner myself, I think it's a nice idea. So.
The mattress firm next door, are they at probably 5 per thousand?
I'm not exactly sure where commercial is for them, but whatever their requirement is, they're probably required to have a lot more parking than they actually need. Mattress stores are very, very light traffic and parking generators, but they fall into a classification of retail, which has a higher per square foot requirement.
Okay, because I see 11 plus 1 there, so that's probably barely meeting for them, but they don't actually need all of it.
Definitely. I mean, I don't know how often you go into a mattress store, but whenever you arrive, the person there is typically the manager because there's usually one person there. And so you might have 2 employees possibly, and then a handful of shoppers.
Nolan?
Thank you. Would echo the comment. I'm generally supportive of the project. Anytime someone wants to expand and upgrade their business, I think that's a good thing. My question has to do with the parking study that you mentioned. It's kind of a 2-part question, maybe for both of you. I guess talk a little bit about how long that process would take and what that cost would be. And then I'm curious to hear from the applicant, does your parking lot fill up a lot? Do you currently have parking problems, or is it at peak times? Is it constant?
And Ms. Niswanger, can you please come back to the podium because we do record these.
No, we don't have issues with the parking. I think what they report is because, we get excited and we make a couple of events. And it was El Mercado, where we invite people there. I think that was one of the questions where it was really crowded, but I promise I'm not going to do that again because I want to follow the rules. The city, and I want the restaurant. Last thing I want to do is causing troubles to the city. I've been trying to keep like a low profile, follow the rules, and no. The days that we have more traffic are Saturday, 11 to 1:30 p.m. lunchtime, and Sundays. That our schedule is like 12 p.m. to like 3 p.m. is where we are more crowded.
And that was a question I had. So you're busiest around lunchtime rather than dinner time?
Yeah, but it's most Saturdays and Sundays.
On the
During
weekends?
the week, Monday through Saturday, it's very fluid, and we do a lot of carry out with the DoorDash and Uber Eats.
Do we know the hours of operation of the mattress firm? Sorry, Mr. Nolan, but just thinking about that comment.
It's like the same time, 9 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Nolan, other questions? Thank you.
Yeah, the rest was for Lee.
Yeah, again, the struggle for us is we would like to be able to help the city come up with something that meets, your stated expectations, your code, and we can't. But again, back to a parking code is very generic, okay? And we have a restaurant that's open and operational, so we can go count it. If we only counted, say, for instance, like maybe a Saturday and a Tuesday during a lunch span of, say, 3 hours, that's 6 hours, we could collect that data and review it. Very, very basic, probably for $2,000, $2,500. But again, all I sell is time, right? So if I've got people counting and I've got engineers evaluating, and then I'm going to make a recommendation to you, I want to be comfortable with that. So yeah, I mean, it's not a few $100s, but it's a few $1,000s to check that, and then the city would at least have the knowledge, the data to say, well, if, let's say, another restaurant wants to do a similar thing and not conform, then we say, well, yeah, but we verified that this user is generating less traffic than our code requires from an operational perspective. Very difficult. It's impossible to do if it's a proposed restaurant that's not open, right? 'Cause we wouldn't
think-
have that.
One other thing to think about, and it's a suggestion that I believe Mr. Cannon made of, taking a look at if a cross-use agreement could be put in place, well, then that's adding potential parking to the restaurant. I mean, maybe it's what they're using now. I don't know if the other, landlord would be amenable to that. Or, I think that it makes interesting sense, the conditional use, right? We know that it's already non-conforming, we know the limit's there, but it's operating successfully. So to say if you're adding 8 spots, but we're putting in conditional use that you can't then use the inside 8 spots, whatever's being used outside, you can't fill inside, then we're not adding additional burden to the parking as there. So I think that, those are things that I do think are reasonable if we want to look at, approval with other restrictions there, where we could make that argument of we are not adding to the parking burden.
Yeah, I agree with that, but my concern is if parking is not really a problem now, save a few spots on the mattress side or one Saturday, one day a week, when I drive by there, I don't see the lot full. I drive by there a lot. It seems like there's kind of a constant flow, but it's never, 20 spots are full. It's half full whenever I see it.
Yeah.
Right.
And that could be another question to the applicant, because we do that not infrequently, of which of those would you prefer? Would be is it something that you're willing to do, is to pay for a track, because that does get charged to the applicant, obviously a traffic study, that it sounds like it could be done in fairly short order for the cost of around $2,500? Or is it that the potential, which we don't have a motion yet with limitation, but those potential limitations of you're going to have to go and get a cross-use agreement or limit the outdoor capacity, or limit indoor capacity when you have outdoor, are either of those preferable to you? And that's something, if you could let us know, if you don't have an answer right now, then that's something maybe we can follow up on. But if you have an answer right now, if you could let us know so that the commission could consider that.
And to add to what Mr. Nolan mentioned, at the same size, the city code looks at maize and wheat the same way as it looks at Chick-fil-A, right? And when you look at those two sites, the parking demands are different for those sites, right? But they're carry-out restaurants of this certain size. I think Chick-fil-A might be 800 square feet larger, 4,300, and this is 3,300. They're not a lot different, but the parking requirements are the same. So,
But yeah, code has, I understand, the code does have to be consistent for a reason there, so there. Mr. Carlin?
And just to follow on what you said, Chairman, there was, I think the original proposal was to codify a review if their problem arose. So to not say that automatically now you can only have 8 seats out or 8 seats in, but if there is a problem, then we empower staff to then take action. So, because if there never a problem never arises, then I don't know why we need to limit their behavior, so.
All of this, of course, depending on, do we have a motion? So just looking to the will of the commission, if there is interest in making a motion, and then we will.
I can take a stab. I would move to approve the alterations as described with, and I'll lean on our city attorney for this, with the caveat that if parking problems do arise in the form of city complaints or other verifiable problems, that then, an ability to ask the owner to, take tables out of service inside related to those in service outside would be a remedy to the problem. Is that a motion?
Is the real question, Mr. O'Keefe, is that permitted? Because I'm concerned a bit about that.
Perhaps you would like to, the motion may be to recommend approval by the Board of Aldermen and recommend that staff develop an additional condition of the permit which would allow substitution of outside seating for inside seating in the event that the Director of Planning and Development Services determines that a parking problem exists, and we'll flesh that out at the board level.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my recommendation was actually, since the site is pre-existing non-conforming, and the 2002 study indicated 11 tables and 32 seats, whether those are indoor or outdoor, as long as they keep with the 32 seats is where I was thinking we could keep it in maintaining the nonconforming status. Should we proceed with the text amendment to eliminate the use of outdoor dining for, as part of the calculation for parking, then the applicant
This
would be
becomes
able to
moot.
move the
Yeah.
outdoor dining, include the outdoor dining without additional review. And we can include that as a condition too.
So I think this becomes a timing issue then as well, which is if that does get recommended, approved by the Board of Aldermen, then this in some ways becomes moot.
It may become moot, but I think, I sense that the commission may be considering allowing the applicant to get on with this before the season evaporates.
I
And
think you've correctly assessed that, Mr. O'Keefe.
And if that's the case, then the approach of saying that we may require adjustment of the indoors, because frankly, I'm not sure how you accommodate that. We pick the chairs up and move them out, and they move them back in later in the day. It seems
Operationally.
it's very
yeah,
fungible.
Yeah. So I believe what we have, though, is a motion on the table, which will then direct staff to provide an additional consideration if we have a parking, or if there is, excuse me, now I had it in my head and now it's gone. If there are challenges to parking, impacted parking, that we may then, so that the applicant will be able to move forward, and we may resolve that here in just a little bit, or actually the board will soon. All right, so we have a motion. Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Nurnberger. Do a roll call vote, please.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Matt Foreman. Jeff Hunt.
Yes.
Carl Carlin.
Yes.
Jeff Moore.
Yes.
Paul Moran, yes. Brian Nolan.
Yes.
John Nurnberger.
Yes.
That's unanimous, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. And this will be for the Board of Aldermen
Yeah, at the August meeting.
at the August
Yeah.
meeting. Thank you. All right, moving on to the broader issue. This is P&Z 23011. This is a text amendment to Article 4, off-street parking and loading regulations. And I think there is a specific focus on restaurants in this, so we should be well primed. Staff report, or are we hearing from Mr. Cannon first?
Mr. Cannon?
Mr. Cannon, please. And folks, I will let you know, you don't need to stick around if you don't want to, but you're welcome to obviously stay.
Good evening. Again, for the record, Lee Cannon with CBB. And I am also completing this work under a different work order for the city as your traffic engineer. So we are looking at a review of the general requirements of the off-street parking and loading code of the city. And then also for about 10 total uses, we're looking at actually reviewing the rates that are being applied in the city of Brentwood. I believe those rates, most of them have been in place for 20 plus years. And, you know, things change over time with the way people decide to move. The younger generation may not drive as much as some people my age. The population ages. Things like DoorDash start to come up for restaurants. Delivery services for retail businesses have come into play. Banks used to be high traffic generators with lots of parking needs, and then all of a sudden, you know, now you have retail banking is down to, you know, paying your mortgage and maybe going to the ATM for a lot of folks. A lot of people have direct deposit and online bill pay. So in general, so with the advent of this project and another one that I believe will be coming in next month, the focus was let's deal with the restaurant use first. And so we wrote a draft report. I believe you have it in your packet, July 6th, and it is the parking code review related to the restaurant uses. One of the things for parking studies that traffic engineers rely on is what are the Joneses doing next door, right? See, you know, who's updated their codes recently and why. And then also a literature review of industry standard practices. There's two primary folks that we rely on, entities. One is Urban Land Institute, ULI, and the other is Institute of Transportation Engineers, ITE. And they both publish studies and update those data assemblies every several years. So they get information from all over the country about a variety of different uses for trip generation and parking demands, and they publish those for hundreds of different land uses. So what we have done for you all related to the restaurants is we're comparing your code to some of your neighbors and neighbors that have similar socioeconomic and geographical attributes, right? Clayton, Maplewood, Richmond Heights, University City. And then to the county you're in, St. Louis County, and the adjacent county, St. Charles, to the west. And so most of the codes, and again, a code as written for a city has to be pretty simple to implement. It can't be, a complex calculation if it's going to be done for a site plan that a developer comes in with a box drawn, and the box is 30 by 100. It's 3,000 square foot box, because the developer may not know how many seats is the box going to have in it, and how many employees is the box going to have. And so patrons and employees create demand for parking stalls, not building square footages. So you could have a restaurant with lots of open space and fewer seats, and that would generate less traffic than a restaurant where the seats are touching each other, just crammed into the space. So, but square footage is something that is readily available almost always and pretty early in the process. And having a calculation where you can apply one number per unit of square foot is pretty easily for a city staff to implement. And so that's why most codes are based on square footages. The other thing is, when you get into the city, certain codes, they'll talk about different kinds of areas for building. Gross floor area means from the wall to wall in each side. There's other terms, gross leasable area, which in different communities takes out different things like elevator shafts and lobbies and stairwells. And so, again, you go back to your city staff may not have a set of building plans. There's a box on the page that's 30 by 100, and they can calculate gross floor area pretty quickly. We like to keep it pretty simple for that reason. But as I mentioned previously, you can come up with a lot of difference based on a business model with a small family dining establishment versus a Chick-fil-A on the same square footage. The Urban Land Institute codes that we researched have actual parking counts from things that are similar, like sit-down restaurant, fast food restaurant with drive-through, and the office building, et cetera, and so on. So that's actual empirical data that's been collected, and they said, based on this massive number of studies that have been done, here are the averages and of parking that's required. ITE does a similar type of a calculation. So there's also, you can get into quite a variety of different types of restaurants. So typically the finer dining establishments have lower seat per square foot, say Bonefish Grill, right, at kind of a higher end, versus your family restaurant, maybe like the Applebee's, right? And then down to your fast feeders at McDonald's and Chick-fil-A. And then the difference of a bar, lounge, and nightclub. So you can get very specific in the uses. So when we looked at the restaurants and in the city, the variety of different things that you have available, and ultimately into our recommendations, we had recommended 3 categories of restaurants, very similar to what you had before, but it's restaurants with carry-out or drive-through or both, restaurants without carry-out or drive-through at all, and then identifying a new subcategory, which is your bar, lounge, nightclub, which is a different animal where you have maybe some food, but more of a reliance on drinks than cocktails than food. Ultimately, though, we wound up, based on the research that we were seeing throughout, for the carry-out drive-through facilities of all sizes, we came up to a number of 14 stalls per 1,000 as a recommendation. So right now, under 1,500 square feet, you are at 8 per 1,000. So very low in the range. Above 1,500, you're at 20 stalls plus 10 per 1,000. So it actually jumps way up higher. At 14 stalls per 1,000, you're kind of in the middle range there. And then with restaurants without carry-out or drive-through, and then the bar, lounge, nightclub, both of those, our recommendation wound up going from where you're at today at 18 per 1,000 down to 16 per 1,000. A little bit lighter than before. And when we run these calculations through a variety of different sizes of facilities from where you are today versus our recommendation versus your neighbors, I don't have this up as a presentation point, but
It's on page 8 and 9, I believe, for folks, if you're looking.
Yeah, I can do
Yep.
a share here if you need to. Yeah.
I didn't send you my
No
graph.
surprise, we are an outlier.
But your city codes were in the upper half to high currently, and our recommendations put you squarely somewhere in the middle to right above the median level of parking requirement for restaurants.
Mr. Ken, just to make sure I'm following along, sorry, when I'm looking at these on page 8, which is the fast food, and then 9, you've got the Olive Garden equivalent, Corner Pub equivalent. These are the existing, or these are the new recommendations?
Sorry, did you say page?
So I'm looking, most important, I think, is page 9. Oh, sorry. Well, it says page 9 at the top right, so.
That's where we stand today compared to
Table
other
4.
municipalities.
Table 4.
Table 4, yeah.
All right. Aha, page 11 on me.
Yeah.
All right.
So yeah,
Yeah.
for reference, I see 114 and 99 at the top.
Right.
And I see it looks like only one. Well, ULI is higher on the Corner Pub, and it looks like Maplewood and St. Louis County are higher than us. Everyone else is lower.
Right.
Okay. So is that existing, or is that the recommendation?
That is existing. Yes. So that's at see where it says Brentwood at 18 per 1,000. So pardon me while I do math without. So that Olive Garden would come down to around 88 spaces from that 114, based on a 14. Pardon me. No, it would not. My apologies. 114 divided by 18 times 16, it would come down to around 100, 101 stalls. And if you look at that 101 related to the different varying numbers, you'd be upper middle. And with the pub, you'd go from 99 to about 88. And again, you'd still be on the higher end, but right now, based on the other codes, you're a lot higher.
Questions, it looks like, if you're ready for them.
Yes, sir.
All right.
And then I just want to make one more statement that we will be looking, and again, it's somewhat of an iterative process with working with the city staff, our recommendations, looking at the data available. We will be providing for all of the other uses recommendations to keep what you have or to make certain modifications for all the other uses in the future, near future.
Sorry, Ms. Kelly.
So I think what we're looking for tonight is direction on, if we're still wanting to be in the upper range, do we want to consider a lower range than the ULI, or he's thinking? And ultimately, we would like to, the next meeting that include all of the uses, maybe we'll consider a maximum parking requirement. The idea is we don't want require too much surface parking when it's not being utilized. Right.
Yeah, I will, and Mr. Carlin, I definitely want to get input. I will say that I appreciate the keeping up with the Joneses, because when I take a look at, and I believe it's in your remarks about Clayton, all right, Clayton is a very kind of dense urban environment. It's a little different in some ways, but I do think that that we're more similar in some ways maybe to a Richmond Heights, where I don't think is particularly walkable, where we're 2 square miles, right? And so I say, from my seat, I think that we're still shooting a little too high. I think that from my perception, and especially with the work that's being done with Brentwood bound, with connections to greenways and that sorts of things, I think that there is an effort, as you mentioned, the DoorDashes, Ubers, and my own little unscientific study of 3 teenagers, none of whom are really interested in driving at all, that I think that maybe we don't want to be even in the mid-high, that maybe mid-sheet low may be a better place for us. But Mr. Carlin, open to you.
Thank you for your work. I agree with everything you just said, as much of what I was going to say, so I'll keep that out. No, that's good. That's good. You did it better. I did have one question, and it doesn't really affect much in terms of how I would think about this, but given the DoorDashes and the Uber Eats and all of the rest, like, is there any restaurant that doesn't qualify as carryout anymore? Or do they all essentially qualify as carryout? And if so, what's the standard to qualify for carryout, right, as opposed to drive-through?
That's actually one of the things that was discussed in the memo is, do they self-identify, or do they need to prove one way or the other that they are what they say they are? Right.
Because they will all self-identify as carryout if it's a lower parking burden, right? So.
Right. And so maybe there's a threshold that, we could identify that, it's X percent of your business as carry out or drive through. But
and so then maybe my ultimate question because we're not voting tonight, I understand. So for consideration would be, is that distinction necessary, or can we even set all to a lower standard and accept that that's the way business is done?
Yeah, I think that as you go, you do see a reduction in parking demands for restaurants with shorter durations and people that don't dine in. So yes, I think definitely that has an impact to reduce parking needs when there is a more reliance on carryout or drive-through.
Mr. Foreman.
So 2 questions. One, given all the cultural change that you've listed at the beginning of the statement, when were the ULI metrics updated? Knowing, we play across the board with multiple building codes, different years, different requirements. When was the ULI authored?
Prior to COVID, so it's been a while. And what they tend to do is they take new data in and keep some of the old data and then knock the oldest data out of the set. But ULI does seem to be a bit high. I mean, if it were up to me, you know, all I sell is time, and I'm a traffic engineer. So if you were going to right size everything, you'd do a parking study based on the business, right? But that's not how the parking code works. And we need something that developers and business people can rely on as a target, right? And then if they decide, well, that's not enough or that's too much, then they can do a parking study. But when it gets right down to it, and I'm asked by other clients, hey, you know, we know we don't need this. Help us prove it. We get into transactional data, duration of stay, that they have information, and I can write them an operational parking plan to look at accumulation, right? Beyond what ULI can do and manipulations or modifications in the code. I mean, that's really, and if you get a successful chain business, they know what they need. They'll come in and they could tell you better than I can what they need. Now, traffic impact, they might be a little, you know, hey, we don't want to build right turn lanes off of our road, but they know what they need to build to be successful, and if they don't, they won't be successful. So, right, you won't go there.
Yeah, and to your point, metrics are changing. We haven't talked about rideshare or e-bikes. And in fact, we actually didn't talk about bike parking on the site either, but we're not going for lead points. So.
How about cars that drive you there and then go back to your house? That'll be before too long. That's a rabbit hole.
So in general, I think I concur with I'd rather be median to a little low than median to high. I'd rather pay engineers to do studies than to pave more parking lots.
Other questions from the commission? Mr. Moran?
Yeah, I would just ask Lee, I know it might be difficult in the acreage available on the page, but table 4, if it had the required numbers as of today, and then proposal A would bring 114 down to 99 and would bring 99 down to 88, that visual would be very effective in terms of communicating where you're going. And maybe you have a couple of proposals, you know, an aggressive downsizing and a medium downsizing, a light downsizing, get it into a table where people can see it on one page maybe. I think that would be very helpful in terms of moving the conversation along and save you having to speak so much about what's going on.
Mr. Hunt?
So I noticed that there's no distinction as far as the size of the restaurant. You have the old standard split between above and below 1,500 square feet. Have you found that there's not really any difference or reason to distinguish between restaurants of a smaller size versus, you know, 4,000 or 5,000 square feet?
Right. So I don't know exactly where the original code came from, why it's written the way that it is. But if you look at the break point where you have 1,500 square foot for the takeout restaurants, they require 8 per 1,000, so that's 12 stalls. And if you bump up to 1,600 square feet, right, now you need 20 plus 2, you need 22. So 100 square feet, you just bump 10 stalls. And why that was, I don't know why that was chosen. So I looked at, and I just did this math here in the room. When you go from 1,000 to 1,500 to 2,000, you go 8 stalls, 12 stalls, 40. So that hard jump didn't make a lot of sense to me. And even with 1,000 square foot, 1,500 square foot restaurant, you know, if you walked into call it a Subway, right? A relatively small restaurant with little to no seating, or a Starbucks, you know, they're probably going to have 3, 4, 5 employees, right? So, yeah, most of the ULI and ITE references did not have a hard jump set between different size facilities.
Or accommodate your pizza shops that are exactly 1,200 square feet every time?
Yeah, again, so, we could look at if there was an interest in restaurants that don't have seats versus carryout, right? Because your pizza shop where you have no seats and it's just a counter, if that's 1,000 square feet, you need 8 stalls. Now, they might need more than that just because of how many delivery drivers they have coming in, the DoorDash folks. And I go to a particular pizza restaurant myself, and there's generally 5 people running around behind the counter and 4 or 5 people waiting on pizzas, and then there's delivery drivers going in and out. So they would need, maybe 12 to 16 stalls for that thing. Then I go to another pizza restaurant where not so much.
Isn't Chick-fil-A moving to a no seating building model? I've seen those under construction where literally it's only drive-through, period.
No, they're not.
Not the one in Brentwood.
Agreed, but we might see one of those from some other.
I know coffee shops, there are some coffee shops that are proposing in different communities around St. Louis that I'm working with. They have a walk-up window and a drive-through service. So you can drive to the coffee shop and they'll hand you your coffee, but there's no indoor seating.
Other questions from the commission? All right, so this is another one I believe we wish to continue over to our August meeting. Good discussion. I appreciate the input. And so do I have a motion to continue the conversation? Sorry, this would be the text amendment to Article 4 of off-street parking and loading regulations over to our August meeting. Moved by Mr. Hunt. Do I have a second?
Second.
Do a voice vote on this. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. All right, we'll continue this to our August meeting. I appreciate that. Next item of business is the aldermanic report. Seeing no alderman present, I don't believe, or online, we'll move over to the director's report. Ms. Kelly.
So as you've heard, we will have a continuation of the parking. Chick-fil-A has submitted for a revision to their site plan to revise their drive-through, and they also have a plan to revise the internal seating. So we're looking at that right now. It is scheduled for the August meeting. So we will continue that. There may be another text amendment that I've been working on as well, but just clean up at this point. So
If I
we'll go
recall
from there.
correctly, did we continue a petition from last session, last meeting as well? Did that, or am I recalling incorrectly from the minutes? No, maybe not. My apologies. I thought.
Oh, there might have been the Carboline. They just decided to, there was continued, but they decided to withdraw. So,
Okay.
yeah.
I just want to make sure. All right, because I know that there is a limit on continuances, so I just, okay. All right. Any other new business? If not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Carlin. Do I have a second? Yes. All in favor, second by Mr. Nuremberger. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.